My name is Manish Srivastava. I'm Associate Director at the Earth Science and Climate Change Division, TERI, and it is my privilege to welcome you all to this Silver Jubilee edition of the World Sustainable Development Summit, and also to welcome you all on behalf of NRDC and TERI to this important and very interesting thematic track, given that we are living in a very uncertain times in terms of what happens and what is likely to happen in the multilateral process and global cooperation, specifically on climate change. I'm sure that this session will help us find some hooks to build our thinking and our understanding of the situation around. Um, Interestingly, while the UNFCCC, the framework agreement on climate change, which was adopted in 1992, but it came into force in 1995, and then in this December last year, it completed 3 decades. 3 decades is a long time in our time in a human's life, but perhaps it's only a step in the larger scheme of things, how global politics and institutions evolve. But it delivered even within that uncertainty and some very interesting, some very important decisions, which are procedural in nature, but I believe that they save the process. They promise that the process will continue and would provide an opportunity for developing countries to keep exploring and raising the voice and concerns of their interest, their issues, the concerns of equity and climate justice, and so on. Since we are slightly delayed, I would not take much time, and I would request Ms. Deepa Bagai, India Director of NRDC India. She has more than 3 decades of experience in Indian administrative services, deeply involved in many policy decisions, and she continues to advise on very important issues such as skill and health in India. So we would request Bagai ma'am to welcome you all formally on behalf of both the organizations. Madam Bagai.
Thank you, Manish. It's very heartening to see so many people in this room, but also a little bit intimidating. So I have to already start by saying that I'm seeing all the stalwarts in the room, some stuck all the way at the back. So welcome, Sid, some right in the front. Rashmiji, I mean, it sort of covers the whole spectrum. And to speak in front of such an august gathering is always a bit of a challenge. But as Manish said, and I really wish he hadn't, 3 decades sounds like a long time, even though in sort of the history of the world it's a blip. But my experience of 3 decades is really a bit scary even for myself when I hear it. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you, Manish, for that kind introduction. I have to say, I'm deeply honored to be here today because the panel sitting here in front of me is, just eminence grise. All of them are people, I think, except perhaps Mansiben and Divya, who are from a much younger generation, and Ambassador Aquino. But the two of us, Shishir and Dr. Subramaniam, we go back 3 decades. So I'm making it clear that I'm not the only fossil here. So thank you very much for this opportunity. A very good morning to all of you. And it is a great pleasure to welcome you to this discussion on global climate outcomes and India's strategic options. Of course, Rashmi sitting here, Mr. R.R. Rashmi, Rajni Ranjan Rashmi, whose name sounds like a Welsh melody, is a dear friend, colleague, and one of the foremost thinkers on climate change and India's position, and has served as a negotiator for the longest time. And I'm deeply honored that his friend, batchmate, but here in his capacity as philosopher, guide, mentor, I'm very grateful to you, Rashmi, for being here. I have to say a big thank you to the Terry team here, Manish, Suruchi, Shelley, everyone here who has helped work very hard to make this possible. And of course, the NRDC team. But I do want us, while we have this gratitude for all the people who have worked to make this possible, to step back and reflect on the moment we are in. And this is a difficult and tense moment in our lives. It's a moment of transition. We were all at Belem not so long ago. The world has changed dramatically even since then. So these tectonic shifts that are occurring with alarming frequency are almost as frightening as the climate change crisis that keeps confronting us with stunning regularity. So the outcomes we had from Belem and what they told us about the landscape of climate engagement is one of the key things, and we can't ignore it, we cannot continue to brush it under the carpet, is that for India, climate finance remains the central political fault line. So we have to, in all our discussions, continue to understand its importance and how this fault line has to be traversed. Secondly, what has been a very sort of, it was growing all the time, but which came out clear in the open, was that adaptation has moved from just mere acknowledgement to taking a much more important post to being part of the structure. So that's the other big element of change that has happened. And third, and that's the most important, I guess, when we are looking at a global situation on climate change and what India must do and how we have to take this forward, is that multilateralism itself is evolving. And there is no better person to talk about multilateralism than my colleague, friend, mentor, guide, Shishir Priyadarshi, also my neighbor for many years. Shishir has worked for the longest time in one of the most important multilateral fora of our time. And he was at the WTO and has led many important initiatives on behalf of the government of India and on behalf of global organizations. So Shishir is the multilateral expert. We have a diplomat here in our midst. Ambassador Aquino is here. We have someone from a India-led multilateral institution here, right here from CDRI, Dr. Subramaniam. Divya is here from a think tank, and Mansi Ben, who also I've had the pleasure and honor to work with for a long time at SEWA, is also here, who represents the grassroots. So this couldn't be a more powerful and a more representative panel. So I'm deeply grateful to all of you for being here and for being a part of this important panel. Eminent, of course, but very important as well. I think what has happened is that the US, we all know, hasn't been playing ball exactly. They have withdrawn from UNFCCC as well. So the whole structure of multilateralism as we knew it, and the organizational and institutional arrangements that made it possible to have rational discussions with all the Committee of Nations as equal players, has shifted dramatically. And India's response all along, and that is a very special thanks to Ambassador Aquino, all our foreign service colleagues, all our colleagues in the environment movement and in the environment ministry, plus think tanks, grassroots organizations, all have come together to craft a response where India's approach has always been steady, thoughtful, and strategic. And I think that is a very important and a very balanced place to be in. But what is equally important is to understand that in these cataclysmic change times, how much that approach can continue to give us the benefits and the impacts that we need from these negotiations, or from being a part of this, not only from the negotiations, but from our own standpoint as a country that is deeply and dramatically affected by climate change practically every day of our lives. The multilateral and bilateral engagements which India has been in have also been very strategic, very thoughtful, and have also been very incisive in many ways. So, the setting up of the International Solar Alliance, the Dr. Subramaniam's Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, the Global Biofuels Alliance, Mission Life, all have carved for India a very special place in the on the multilateral stage as well, as a nation that has been carefully engaging in all these areas with the hope of taking along much of the global south, but also influencing the global north to be able to address these challenges in a very forthright, but also a very non threatening, and yet a position that makes it possible to move forward instead of just posing roadblocks. I remember long ago in Paris there was that famous cartoon before, when the Paris Agreement was happening. A few days before that, I think it was everywhere. It was in Le Tribune and all the French newspapers, of a rail track which said climate negotiations, and a big elephant sitting there which said India. That has changed dramatically. India is now almost at the leadership, and the world is looking to us to take that leadership position for many, many countries, especially as the changes that are happening due to many larger countries that were traditionally taking the leadership role having had to shift because of a lot of geopolitical dynamics that are facing all of us. So, our emphasis on constructive South-South cooperation, I think, is a very important pillar of how we are dealing with these challenges. But the strategic imperative ahead for us is that we have to now navigate a changing global order and have strategic options for climate action which are clear, which are influential, which allow us to take that leadership stage where somewhat of a vacuum is occurring from time to time. And I think it is India's moment, on the one hand, to take that leadership, but on the other, to be very conscious of our own development trajectory and keep full sight of it while keeping sight of what is happening to the world. So I think that is a really important part of how we will be moving forward. And I will expect this eminent panel to reflect deeply and thoughtfully on that issue. We had, ahead of COP30, NRDC and Terry together, and I remember fondly Ambassador Aquino having delivered the keynote address there, climate conversations on the road to Belem, and that had served as a preparatory platform. Like I said at the start, the road to Belem and then the road to WSDS has been full of violent ups and downs. So I think I'll just request the panel to taking account of all those developments that are happening in our world and within the country, and the overall climate challenge that India is facing and the world is facing. How do we navigate this turbulence? How do we navigate this new geopolitical world order? And where is it that India should be? And how is it that we should move forward? It's a bleak and depressing and difficult time at one level, but at another, as I said earlier, this could be India's moment. So while I say that, I would just like to end with a couple of lines from a favorite Urdu poet of mine, Tariq Badayuni. So here is how the couplet goes. Ek na ek shamma andhere mein jalaye rakhiye. For those who don't understand Hindi or Urdu, keep one or the other light burning in this darkness. Ek na ek shamma andhere mein jalaye rakhiye. सुबह होने को है, माहौल बनाए रखिए. The dawn is about to break. Let's keep the atmosphere as ready for this dawn to break. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Ma'am Bagai, for elaborating on what is the thinking behind organizing and putting together this session. And now I really feel a sense of, entitlement in inviting our next speaker for the simple reason that I have learned from him for over 18 years now, and it's really a privilege to have a mentor like him. I would request Mr. R.R. Rashmi is a distinguished fellow with TERI, but he is one of the key architects of the climate regime as we know it today. He was there when we had the Bali Action Plan. He has seen the ups and downs from Copenhagen to Cancun to Paris, and later on the making of rule books and setting the agenda. He has been a negotiator on trade issues, from the global forums to national policy to subnational policy. He has had that imprint on India's climate policy architecture. And right now, he is leading a very large intersectoral multidisciplinary team at TERI that is providing assistance to the government of India on transforming the one of the most strategic sector, which is the shipping sector. So how to make the green shipping possible. So with that sense of entitlement and excitement, I request Mr. Rashmi to share his perspective and give us his opening remarks.
Oh, thank you, Manish, for very kind words and giving me more than what I deserve. It's as Deepa was saying, it's intimidating to be in front of so many enlightened people who know much more than I do, perhaps, about the world. The world which is in turmoil. It's really a tumultuous time, and things are changing very swiftly. It's a mercurial world, and in which we don't know what our position is going to be a moment later or a few days later. Given this scenario, what is happening in the world of climate change and environmental protection, this is even more unnerving. You know, way back in 1992 when the convention was drafted, and India played a very important role in drafting the convention, the world was different. It was a much more stable world. The climate was not stable. The objective of the convention is to stabilize climate. And fortunately, the politicians and the scientists were one at that time. In fact, the guiding principle was consensus. The scientists and the policymakers agreed on one point, that climate is really at risk and we need to join hands to stabilize it. And that's how the convention came into being. But unfortunately, the arguments which you see today, those arguments were made very soon when the Kyoto Protocol was drafted. So the world kept changing. The commitments were never implemented, but the principle of consensus was never forgotten. That is what is at risk today. So, the real challenge when we talk about multilateralism and protecting the environment and through international cooperation, the real challenge is this principle of thinking together and agreeing on a consensus view of how the world should move forward. We know that we are all guided by different interests. There are multiple interests in the negotiating space itself. When we meet together, we see diverse views. The countries are divided in different groups. We are also a part of a different group. We all don't think together always at the same in the same plane. But there is a general agreement that we need to act together. And it is this thinking that I think which drove the COP presidency in the last conference, that it's not important to look at the legal framework and start negotiating it afresh every time, because the principle of consensus is agreed. Now there are many who are trying to reopen this principle. So let's not get into that controversial space at all. Rather than that, let's look at implementation. How can we enhance implementation based on the agreed principles or the agreed framework? That's the real challenge, and that's how you see this concept of global implementation accelerator. So the Brazilians were very clever in that sense, that they didn't reopen the legal questions, or they didn't want to revisit the whole question of consensus itself, because that is what damaged Kyoto Protocol, and that is likely to damage Paris Agreement also, if we start looking at that question from a different perspective. The good thing about Paris Agreement is that it allows everyone to act voluntarily. There is no binding target. There is no binding global target except the global temperature goal. And in fact, you will be surprised to know that there is, or most of you must have known, that in the original convention, there is no global goal of this kind. It was only in 2008 in L'Aquila when this temperature goal concept was actually initially envisaged, and then it became part of Copenhagen Accord, then later Cancun decisions, and then finally in the Paris Agreement. So this global goal is there, but it doesn't convert itself automatically into a global target. The target is always set by the countries themselves. And I think the COP presidency at Belem understood this conundrum, and they pressed implementation rather than renegotiating the legal order or the framework in which the decisions are taken. So that's a good thing to happen, and hopefully that spirit will continue and it will guide our actions in the future. So the challenge before us is that we know that we are not on track. The total impact of all the NDCs put together, it's only about 12%. The IPCC says that we need to bring it down by 43% compared with 2019 levels by 2030. So the challenge is that there is a huge gap. This 12% effort has to rise to at least 40% or 35%. Net zero is long and far into the future, but by 2030 or 2035, when we finish with the second cycle of the NDCs, we need to raise the ambition in the NDCs in such a manner that we are able to change the course. Fortunately, there are two things which have happened, which will give you some sense of consolation, is that the global peak is perhaps within our reach now. Not immediately. Global emissions are still rising. They are still in the range of 52 or 53 billion tons a year, plus minus 6. If you take, the IPCC tables are difficult to understand, but if we are somewhere in the range of 52 to 53 billion tons today, and if we have to bring it down to 25 or 20 billion tons in a matter of 5 to 6 years, what is the level of ambition that we have to increase? And that has to be on a voluntary basis. That is what the framework of the Paris Agreement is. So it's a very challenging situation, but everything is not lost. As I said, the global peak is perhaps within our reach, because the developed world, for whatever it is worth, their emissions have now reached a trajectory where they are more or less going to stabilize. It's a very high level of stabilization. They need to bring it down, but they have not done so far. But the future, our success of our future efforts will lie in how we modify our trajectory of emissions based on energy consumption. Now, fortunately, the developing countries have shown the leadership here. In fact, the developing countries have done much more as far as energy trajectory modification is concerned than the developed world. They have only stabilized their emissions, but we have bucked our emissions trajectory already. India has shown leadership again there. Because if we take the business as usual, our emissions would have gone up to about 6 to 7 billion tons by 2040 or 2045. We are currently at about 3 billion tons, or 3.5 billion tons if you take the gross figure. But we have already started bucking the trend here. So we are showing a path of leadership, and which the fortunate but the developed world has not shown. They have not brought down their emissions, they have only stabilized their emissions. We have already started bringing down our business as usual from the current path of trajectory. So that's a very positive thing to happen. The second thing is that the question of finance. We are doing it all without external finance. So this is another positive thing to happen, that the many countries like India, which have shown demonstrable leadership in this field, they have done it without any external assistance. In fact, the total external finance in India for climate change efforts is just about 20%. The rest of this effort is being financed internally by our own economy. And we have now a challenge of net zero, where we have to put in more money. We have to raise our ambition further, and we have to bring down our business as usual further. So question is, how do we mobilize internal finance? We know that the world is a very, very difficult world when it comes to the changing the financial architecture in the global arena. It's not going to happen overnight, although there are efforts being made. But we cannot make presumption that we will be able to finance our net zero strategy only with the help of external finance. We have to do it internally. That is again something which we have to consider ourselves. There are positive signs, because if we can finance our NDCs to the extent of 80% ourselves, I'm sure we can even finance our net zero strategy internally, provided we have a clear roadmap here. So I'll stop here by mentioning two points here. One is that we should not look at this threat of multilateralism. We should not, rather, I mean, it's a threat which is real and challenging, but we should not be disheartened by this challenge. We know our strength. We can perhaps do much more with our own internal resources, and if we put our strategy clearly in place, I think we can do much more despite the challenges which are emerging. The only thing which I would like to say here is that we need to make our stand very clear on two things. One is that this threat of multilateralism, even if it is not expressed or even if it's not resolved, the unilateral threats need to be taken into account. And I would not like to name any particular country or any particular organization, but this threat is real. Even if the countries don't engage in a multilateral field, they can act unilaterally, and we have to be prepared for that kind of situation. So even if we are able to manage our stay the course as far as emission reductions is concerned, we have to be alive to this threat, and then we have to gear ourselves to meet this challenge in future. Some of the trade deals that we have done recently have also not been able to resolve this threat. So I think we need to take this into account very seriously and prepare ourselves. Second is the clean tech transition, the technology part, where we have succeeded ourselves with our own efforts. But here there is a global cooperation needed. That's why we need global coalitions to really, I mean, we have our own coalition for, let's say, disaster management. CDRI is there. We have set up a global biofuel alliance. But we need also similar alliances in the field of advanced technologies, whether it is hydrogen or whether it is steel or any other field. We need global alliances in the field of technology transition, which can help us move forward. So once again, and I'll thank you for your attention, But I would like to end by saying that the efforts being made by NRDC and my colleagues in TERI, they're fantastic. They have brought home some of the key points in the paper that they're going to release. And the future is not very, the future is always challenging, but we need not be disheartened by that challenge. We have our strength is really robust, and we can do much more with the help of cooperation of all the stakeholders and the interested and the willing parties at the global level also. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rashmi, for giving such a comprehensive and overview and kind of a framework to think through the current times and cooperation on climate change, climate action. Please join me also to welcome Dr. Ajay Mathur, who will be moderating the panel discussion. He, of course, does not need an introduction, but the formality is that he is my former boss and current and long-standing mentor for me. He has led India in negotiations in the framing of the basic structure of Green Climate Fund. He has led many implementation-oriented missions, such as the Solar Alliance, Bureau of Energy Efficiency, things that we feel that put India on a leadership pedestal, and the global south at least certainly can learn a lot from India, and that probably is a way forward for future of sustainable development. But before we enter to into the panel discussion, we have a issue brief for launch. The brief story behind the brief is that in October, TERI and NRDC together had organized a similar event looking at the kind of anxieties and questions about the future of global climate cooperation, and had discussions on that, and building on those discussions, following the outcome of the COP30 and also the advices or the opinions that were made from the panelists in that event. Some of them are part of the panel. And with this, I would hand over the proceedings to Dr. Mathur. Dr. Mathur, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Manish. And first of all, my apologies for being late. I'm delighted that we were able to start with Ms. Bagai and Mr. Rashmi. I have the distinction of having a stellar panel. I will be brief, and please hold me to it. I also want to make sure that there's an adequate time for questions from the audience. Let me start with Vimal. Vimal, you know, we have had the COP in Belem, in which India was deeply involved. What would you say was the most consequential outcome? And would India's ambitious mitigation efforts continue unaffected in spite of the last night's declaration of 126% duty on solar cells from India to the US? So you don't need to answer that. I just added it on.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. And of course, thanks to TERI and NRDC to organize this. I would say that when you look at COP, I mean, it was the 30th version, so one can always say that things keep happening every year. Despite all what people say about multilateralism, it's a proof that multilateralism exists, and we meet and we talk, and we come up with some document. The concept, as Rashmi sir had mentioned about consensus, is very strong, and that's perhaps one of the big takeaway from Belem, that there were a lot of divisive discussions. There were issues where people were having different point of views, but eventually they decided that they will come together and agree on one document and adopt that. So I would say that one definitely key takeaway is the strength of multilateralism, which still exists when it comes to climate change. The second, I would say, is a shift which happened when it comes to the topics. So one would keep talking about emissions, reductions, and how we want to achieve that, and that used to be the push. But there was a certain amount of balancing which happened during Belem, where adaptation also found its place. And there was, of course, a lot of discussion which happened prior to Belem. So it was not something which happened at Belem, but something before. But then they agreed, yes, we should have at least some global goals on adaptation. Of course, although it's on a voluntary basis, but there was definitely an agreement that we should try to balance this aspect. But I think the key message, I would say, and which Rashmi sir also kind of alluded to in his remarks, was the Brazilian presidency, whose entire effort was, I think we have talked enough, it's time to take action. So the focus was more on implementation. And there was definitely a lot of focus during the discussion and also during the negotiation on means of implementation. And perhaps I would say that some of the very key outcomes included something like a technology implementation plan, a just transition mechanism, mitigation work plan, global goals on adaptation. So there were a whole lot of, I would say, agreements to start having conversations on these issues, which was so far not done. I mean, can you imagine 30 years and we are still struggling to say that, okay, let's have a just transition mechanism. So, I mean, so if one looks at it from a youth's point of view, they will say that, what did you do last 30 years then? So at least there is some, I would say, candlelight which has been lit, and let's see where we go with this. But I would say some of the more significant part was also on the finance side. And there was a lot of reluctance and resistance during the conversation, whether we talk about grant-based financing. So there was this whole focus that, you know, we have agreed on NCQG, so what's the point of having more conversation on these issues? But eventually the realization did come that, yes, we have never spoken in the last 30 years about grant-based financing. So let's at least have a conversation. So that was perhaps one of those push which we had in Belem to have a conversation on Article 9.1 to see that let's have a conversation on grant-based financing. So I would say that there are definitely a lot of key messages when it comes to Belem, and it did put back the focus on conversation on climate, which it should be, rightly so. But I would say going forward from this is that at least the Brazilians have shown one focus which we need to look at is how do we do the implementation. Yeah. And that perhaps would be the most underlining or the key message which comes to this. You want to go on to the...
No, that's okay. That's okay. Vimal, I'm actually glad that you mentioned the global goals on adaptation. I almost thought that you had forgotten it because it's the last thing that you added in the list of successes at COP. You know, it has been said time and again that that adaptation is important for us. The global goals on adaptation, and I'm turning to Mr. Priyadarshi now. Shishir, you know, we have had a strong discussion at Belem. We have focused on mitigation and finally on adaptation. How does the fact that we have actually agreed on the global goals on adaptation recognize the developing countries' point of view that development and adaptation go together? And what are the institutional shifts, both at the global level, but more importantly at the Indian level, that are needed to ensure that, you know, I'm an energy person. So energy access and adaptation go together.
Thank you so much. But let me begin by obviously thanking Terry and NRDC for this opportunity to speak. Let me also thank, Deepa. She did say, sorry, sir, this happened when you're not here. She mentioned the fact about 3 decades of us being together, but I need to put the record straight. Those 3 decades started when she was a teenager and I was well into my 30s. So there's a lot of difference. I mean, even though that, but yes, we were, and maybe it's the right point of me to mention this. We were both district magistrate in a common commissionerate, and we used to have these monthly meetings. And the first thing I learned was that it's best to follow Deepa after she has spoken, because then I could just say I agree with her. And that is actually today too. Everything she said at the beginning, extremely important, extremely relevant. I think, very, very important points. But let me come to Ajayji, what you asked. Very coincidentally or circumstantially, I'm now working in a think tank, which is looking actually at both these parallel, unfortunately, parallel universes, which is, sustainability and wanting to achieve our zero net emission goals. And also, we are doing a lot of work in the context of, the public policy imperatives to get to Viksit Bharat. And very often, these two parts of my team don't often sit together. But you're making them, we are making them sit together in a way to say that 2047 is important, but 2070 is also important. And neither overrides the other. And that is why the point that you make, sir, the way that I would probably like to put it here is the way things are going to evolve, then the climate challenge of the next decade is fundamentally going to be a developmental challenge under climate stress. This is the only way that you're going to merge these two tracks together. Because look, finally, let's take a country like India. But India is not alone in this. Large partners in Global South. Mitigation certainly matters. There's absolutely no doubt about it. No one is even diluting that fact at all. But the immediate imperatives for all these countries will be development, industrialization, growth. And you said you're basically an energy person. Somehow we've got to get affordable energy access very much into this conversation of resilience. And I think one way, we've talked obviously, and it's a pleasure listening to Rashmiji always, the UNFCCC. I don't know, maybe it's time to move beyond a very narrow emission-centric lens and also start recognizing what you said, energy access and adaptation as also being very much part of those developmental enablers. And I think this is where, and thank you for getting that, the global goals on adaptation really matter. I think the indicators should not only track resilience outcomes, that they must, there's no doubt about it, but also the developmental co-benefits that come about, reduced energy poverty, improved maybe even agricultural productivity, because a lot of these finally will make a country much better prepared to take care of the issues that require it. And a small point on global climate finance, because it was mentioned. The fact is, adaptation finance is still, to a large extent, heavily projectized. Can we move away? I don't know, can we or not, but I'm asking this more as a question, because a number of countries, when they take or ask for adaptation, climate adaptation finance for projects which have finally climate adaptation as a goal, but it may come a little later, they don't get it. They don't get it. And therefore, can we somehow introduce this into the conversation of a much more pragmatic approach to climate finance than rather a very, very projectized approach. And a final point, Ajayji, is, we've talked about it, and, ad infinitum for 3 decades, as Vimal says. Equity in the approach has to be operationalized, not merely acknowledged. we acknowledge equity, we need to operationalize equity. And I think the WTO, and I'll end with that because there's so much talk about the multilateralism, we must learn from the multilateral experiences that country like India's have had there. You know, when all our negotiators signed on in the 1995 to the WTO agreement, we all patted ourselves on the back because we'd got a lot of concessions and favorable outcomes for developing countries which were couched in what you call the special and differential treatment. But when it actually came down to implementation, we found that they were all, or a very large majority, were couched in best endeavor language. And you could not hold one single soul to accountability on that. You know, we've stumbled once. So the point is, as we take forward this whole discussion, we shouldn't stumble twice.
So, maybe later and certainly to the audience, my question is that especially after the recent Indo-German partnership and the India-EU FTA, the mother of all deals as it was called, is bilateralism replacing multilateralism? Or maybe I should say, is bilateralism leading multilateralism? I'll leave it there and let you think about this, but let me turn to Divya. And Divya, you know, Belem, to me, as has been said by Mr. Rashmi, by Vimal, and by Shishir, has been, it has really been influential. It's been influential in as much as it turned the agenda from declarations to execution. Now, can I, ask you to focus on particularly climate financing? Where does responsibility lie? What are the kinds of sources? What is the scale of financing that would be needed?
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. And it's great to be sitting within this panel, which is really an August panel. I mean, it's an important question, sir, as you ask about what happened in Belem. I think the focus came back to the Baku to Belem roadmap, which actually brings or calls for mobilizing 1.3 trillion US dollars for financing on climate action for developing countries, but also by 2035 annually. And also looking at tripling adaptation finance by the same year. Well, we have had that discussion in the previous COPs, and we've moved from hopeful to hopeless in the past few COPs. What has happened in Belem, which gives us a renewed hope, is talking about the framework agreement that is called the Mutirao Agreement on Finance, which actually calls upon how do we move from negotiations to concrete financing mechanisms and coming together and coming age of countries and domestic policies on climate to be mobilizing finance internally as well as internationally. So multilateralism, as we were talking about, bilateralism, as we were talking about, also creates a highlight point. We are in a very polarized world, and we should agree that multilateralism or bilateralism will be influenced by that polarized influence that we are seeing at the moment. One more
At the
thing.
moment, or is it there, has been there for many years?
So the geopolitics that we are looking at this moment is creating these poles like never before. And that is why I'm calling that out now in that flavor. If we had to look at the current geopolitical uncertainty, I would not hesitate in saying that we cannot no longer rely on large consensus mechanism. We will have to rely, or maybe the climate action or financing will be shaped by coalitions of the willing.
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to say. And in that, countries like India and France, for example, who will be leading on the BRICS and G7 respectively, will have great responsibility and leadership to bring the South-South cooperation as well as the framework of the South around financing for climate action. I think that is an important point of confluence after Belem and during Belem as they were being designed. One more thing that the Moti Rao agreement says is bringing subnational and non-state actors central to climate action, and particularly regarding financing. So I would also like to bring into your notice that we have to mobilize systems processes that will empower subnational government to access international finance, as well as create avenues within the state mechanism and machinery to mobilize finance toward climate action. Now, there is a story around development, adaptation that Mr. Priyadarshi was also talking about, that, you know, you have to look at development
Right.
that is driven by or affected by climate stress. So if we look at some of these financing mechanisms, say for example infrastructure development, and weave in climate into that, I think we can definitely derive co-benefits around development or co-benefits around climate action within the same roadmap.
That is very important, because I think within the same roadmap, the last words that you used are amazingly important, and I'd like to throw this question to you and to the audience. What do we do in the years to come? Would the institutions, you know, we have a certain amount of investment money coming in. It isn't very great, but we've got some amount of investment money coming in. How do we enhance it? How do we change the Indian institutions and so on? But I'll give you time to reflect on it. I'll also put it to the audience. And meanwhile, let me focus, Ramesh. Ramesh, you were at Belem. You saw the power of organizations like yours, or my former organization, ISA. ISA and CDRI have a role to play. Despite Belem, I am not particularly enthusiastic about the benefits that we'll get from the multilateral movement in the years to come, at least the next 3 years. So what is it that the CDRI can do to enhance the agenda irrespective of the multilateral process?
Thank you so much, Dr. Mathur. Very happy to be here, particularly special thanks to NRDC and Terry, and fantastic insights from both of you, greatly appreciate. You know, you mentioned earlier 3 decades, right? So I'm careful to mention 3 decades. Having been in a multilateral organization owned by 69 countries for a long time, for about 30 years, the Asian Development Bank, coming to CDRI, about a year there. Fantastic experience. Now, what prospects does an institution like CDRI, or you look at ISA, the Big Cats Alliance, Biofuels Alliance can do? Each of them is very clearly focused on a specific goal. Multilateral institutions obviously have lots of issues to think about, worry about, and so on. But in that context, how do we kind of zone in, hone in on disaster resilience is what CDRI does. And in the case of ISA, you know much better than anyone else here, and so on for the big cats and the biofuels. That clarity and vision, why is it needed? Because I'll give you some data points. If you look at disasters, every year the world loses about $800 billion. $800 billion. This has been happening, unfortunately, year after year. Annual average losses is what we call it. Developing countries alone, that is India, South Asia, Southeast Asia, Pacific included, are suffering $400 billion. So this is a massive number, right? Now add to that another number, which is the trillions of dollars of infrastructure investments that are needed. Add one more number, that in most of the continents, developing countries in Africa, for example, or in Asia, much of the infrastructure is yet to be built. In Africa, for instance, 70% of infrastructure is yet to be built. So do we sit around, do developing countries sit around as multilateral processes take time to develop or not? That is where India, certainly there are many other countries that are involved in CDRI, ISA and the other organizations, but leading this process, India, what it has done through CDRI, is how do we bring about a change in thinking? Having been working on ESG considerations for a long time in project financing, I've always felt that, if I can use the term, resilience, unfortunately, does not have create the fear of God. When it comes to safeguards, social safeguards, environmental safeguards, gender, you have that concern, compliance-related concern in multilateral institutions.
Right.
But whether
Right.
it's multilateral
Business.
or bilateral institutions or even private financial institutions, resilience has not reached that cult status. So what CDRI does and what India has done, working with other coalition members, we have 53 countries and 12 partner organizations, is how to elevate resilience to that level and what can be learned between amongst the coalition members as well as what India can offer to other countries. And you mentioned Belem. Belem, in fact, at the CDRI pavilion, we had a number of countries coming to us and asking, oh, this is fantastic. This is led by the Global South. Of course, there are many North countries involved as well. So just what do we do? Its advocacy is going to be very, very important. How do we raise that resilience to a pedestal is very important. Not going to be easy. Because only with 4% of climate financing going into resilience,
Right.
how do we really create a paradigm shift that resilient infrastructure will be bankable infrastructure? That's going to be very, very critical. The work that CDRI has done very clearly shows, and including by looking at the fiscal risk framework that India has got, we work closely with the 16th Finance Commission, for example, and we are replicating that knowledge to other countries. Fiji, for instance, Ghana in Africa, Maldives in South Asia, Nepal, talking to Philippines, Indonesia, and so on. What can be done to address the risks that you face because of disasters, hazards, and so on? How do you really make a case for public and private investments in infrastructure? So what institutions like CDRI can do is, given the financing challenges as well as the very complex array of issues that we are looking at, how do we create momentum by developing countries taking action, by collaborating together? Of course, you do need capital mobilized from multiple sources. My last point I'll make, actually, I was tempted when you asked Mr. Priyadarshi this question on if you are, we shouldn't divert our attention into trade. He knows knows the landscape much better. What you raised, bilateralism versus multilateralism, that reminded me of a term that we used to have in ADB, the noodle bowl argument. Okay. When you have a series of bilateral things that are happening, they may have benefits, but unless you bring them together in the multilateral context, you're not going to have impact. Let me leave it there. But
Ramesh, I'm going to leave one word, and I would like a discussion on this. Would countries be excluded if we go in for these agreements? What I most fear is that the small island states, for example, would get left out. But I leave that to Mansi. Can I call you Mansi? Okay. Mansi, your organization has initiated a number of what I would call very innovative projects, which are both for local development, particularly women, as well as climate friendly. What do you think needs to change in order to bring them up the priority? I mean, let me be more exact. We are looking at a number of opportunities. We are looking obviously at the multilateral process, but we are also looking at the India BRICS presidency. What can we do to enhance the priority of the kinds of innovations, and how can other developing countries learn from the initiatives, learn both what is right and what is wrong?
Thank you so much. And I would like to first thank NRDC, Terry, for bringing me here and giving me an opportunity to represent the voices of over 3.8 million poor self-employed women from the 20 states in India, the members of SEVA. These women are the poorest of the poor. They are the street vendors, the construction workers, the waste recyclers, the agricultural workers. We at SEVA call them the wheels of the pyramid, because these women, they contribute immensely to the country's GDP and also to the adaptation and mitigation solutions. And yet, they are the ones who are the most disproportionately impacted by the climate shocks. And yet, they are the ones who are mostly invisible. But what we have learned organizing these women for over 5 decades now is that these women, they do not wait for someone to come and help them, someone to address the challenges that they are facing. They collectivize, they organize, and they take action. Because of their intrinsic caring nature, they have become the first responders, the climate warriors that we would say. Since past 4 years, from 2022, these women, 3.8 million women, have launched India's largest climate campaign, which we call as the Swachh Akash campaign or Building Cleaner Skies campaign, where women with 3 major objectives. First is to create awareness and education on what is climate change and how it is impacting the lives and livelihoods of the poor, of the workers, because 93% of the workforce in India is in the informal, and they are the most disproportionately impacted, and yet they are the most unaware of what is happening. So that is the first objective. The second one is to promote adaptation and mitigation solutions at grassroots level. And third is to bring visibility to this women-led climate action. So women have trained as climate educators. They are creating awareness and education at household level on adaptation and mitigation solutions. They are creating green villages. They are creating green chawls. They are creating innovative financing solutions like the world's first ever parametric heat insurance, livelihood recovery and resilience fund. So what we have learned, and this is what we can share with the world, there are 4 things. Mainly, first is that instead of us creating programs and initiatives for climate action, we should support these women and their women-led climate adaptation, mitigation, whatever it is, because the focus of these women-led solutions is not just climate action. It is also addressing poverty alleviation, sustainability, gender equality, and digital and financial inclusion. So that is the first learning that we've had. The second one is that there is a need to include these most vulnerable people into policy dialogues. When we are designing policies, when climate action policies, they need to be included because they can bring what are the gaps and what are the challenges. For example, adaptation and mitigation solutions. We are all saying that we need to have net zero, but these women, if they have to adapt these adaptation and mitigation solutions, they are not cheap. They are very expensive. So how do we enable these rural households, informal households, to tap into voluntary carbon market and make these solutions affordable? We piloted it with salt pan workers. We piloted it with biogas digesters in the rural areas. How do we share these learnings, bring these learnings into policy framework? The third learning is on the financial aspect. We have seen that poor do not need charity. What they need is innovative financing solutions. What we have piloted is what we call as Livelihood Recovery and Resilience Fund, which is a pool of blended finance, which brings in innovative financing solutions like first FLDG, interest subvention, that unlocks public and private capital and helps these poor households to adopt these adaptation and mitigation solutions. So this is where financial service providers need to work with workers' organizations, need to work with women who are the most affected to design financial services and solutions. And the last one is that, sister to sister learning and knowledge sharing is the most powerful way to address climate solutions. We all need to work together. And that is where SEVA is working with countries in the developing countries, because we've seen that the challenges faced by the workers across the global south are similar. So there is no need to reinvent the wheel. We can learn from each other. Last week when Deepaji you had come to Seva, we had a delegation from Malawi and from Kenya. They came to Seva, they saw what our women have done, and that not only helps them in envisioning what they can do, but it motivates them that if women like me have been able to address climate challenges, then I also can do it. So this is what I think we can share with the world.
Amazingly interesting. I think the sister to sister interaction is something that can be pushed, particularly within developing countries. To me, it's education. I did learn from your organization the issue of financing and the fact that the poor do not need charity, but they need access to financing. It's something that I've taken to heart myself. We have, unfortunately, not too much time. What we will do is we'll take 3 questions together, one after the other. I'll request my colleagues to answer, and then we'll take 3 more, and we'll go on till about 1:25. And at that point, I would request a closing remark from my panel, and hopefully turn the podium back to the organizers by 1:30. So can I ask for a show of hands? I see Suruchi. Go ahead.
Just replying to the question you asked on bilateral versus multilateral. And I was just thinking the kind of crisis we are talking about and the scales that we need to address it. I think just a very small response to it. I think it's all hands on deck.
Okay. Any other question? I don't, yes, go ahead.
I'm an academic, so
So am I. I pretend to be an academic these days.
So of course, please take the question in that light. I just attended the Mumbai's Climate Week, and one of the things that came out very loud and clear is that we all are working in silos, and in some
who is working in silos? that becomes important.
Yes, within India, all the different organizations, institutions, so on. This is the message that came out, that if we have to work to scale and implement, it has to be. But the roadmap is not clear, and I think this is just something that I want to put out. We don't talk about youth skilling. We don't talk too much about education. We don't talk about promoting this in our next generation, sustainability thought leaders and so on. So I just feel that give us a roadmap. I mean, we are having these discussions, but there's no way to understand. Like is it Mansi? Miss Mansi? What you said is that there are clear examples of success, that there are these women who have created the green villages and so on. We don't get to see that within India even. So how do we get to, replicate that or give the examples? For instance, I'm working in Uttarakhand with the Beach Bachao Andolan activist, Mr. Vijay Jardhari ji. And so somewhere we have to show this, that, these are successes, these are model things that are happening that we can. Anyways, it's a long-winded.
I think it's a good question. I could spend an hour responding to you, but clearly our efforts are not adequate. But I'll wait for the panel. Yes, ma'am.
So my name is Shalini. I run an organization called NADI, which is a Women in Climate Network. We do capacity building, career support, and we have a community or a network of women who are urban professionals wanting to come into the climate
Only
space.
women?
Only women,
So
yes.
I have no hope. Okay.
You can definitely be an ally and be an expert as part of the organization. So
I want help. Okay.
So my question is, I think what you said, Mansi, I completely resonate, because what we are also seeing on the ground is women want to kind of share and share best practices, share their learning. There's so much of peer learning happening, but this is all very informal. a structured way of bringing them together requires lot of resources. So because you spoke about multilateralism and so many other organizations involved with financing, my question is in terms of like, every job eventually would need be a climate job, need a climate lens, you need green skills. So, if you could kind of throw some light on what's happening, how is world looking at it, what type of financing are available for organizations, and like one of the things which you spoke about grant financing, is it something we could look at? I mean, this is just an understanding of how do we just develop people who are interested to kind of move into the space as we become a net zero organization or strive towards a net zero India country, how do we kind of go about it?
Thank you. What I'm going to do, okay, one more question and then I'm going to turn to the audience. Oh my God, there are even more. We'll ask her and then we'll ask you.
Yeah, so this is just building upon what Mansi Ben was saying regarding the work at the grassroots level. There are a lot of organizations that struggle for funding at the grassroots level, but I'm just thinking, is there not high time that a national level aggregator organization comes into place, which takes funding from foreign organizations and funds, and then disperses them to various grassroots organizations, which are probably not in the capacity to connect to them directly, especially given the FCRA constraints now. So I think there's a need for a national level aggregator organization as well as state level aggregator organizations.
I see your point. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. My greetings to the panel. I have a PhD in...
Could you also identify yourself?
Yes, I'm Dr. Ragya Zadu. I finished my PhD in strategic environmental impact assessment, and I raised this question that these roadmaps and everything that happens on a global platform, they are mostly in the international law and sense, they are mostly non-binding depending on the countries on how they are going to accept it and interpret it for their own mechanisms. So how do we bridge, like for example, in the sense of climate litigation, how do I synthesize this so that we can make a law and we can make an adequate administrative framework so that, we have the legal support as well, along with having a moral high ground in this particular subject. How do I make my law and my mechanism strength?
Okay, thank you.
Have a lot of
I'm going to ask Ms. Bagai and Ms. Rashmi and Mr. Rashmi to also point or to also suggest. What I would add is there is a problem because we are looking at integrating climate and development on the one hand, and we are looking at only climate litigation on the other. Does this lead to a split personality? I'll just leave it there. But may I ask Mansi, there was a very specific question addressed to you. Vimal, you may or may not want to answer all that.
Two questions actually, Ajay bhai. The first one, ma'am said from the academia world. So actually we are...
I forgot to ask you to introduce yourself. Dehradun. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Pritiben. So yeah, to answer your question, so we, as I said earlier, we strongly believe in sister-to-sister learning and knowledge sharing. And therefore at SEWA, we are putting together what we call as a global coalition. But of course, it's a global coalition, and therefore India is always welcome to join, where we organize these kind of exposure and dialogue programs where groups from different organizations, which can be a combination of, grassroots organizations, policy makers, and philanthropic foundations, a mix of those. So they come to SEWA for 7 to 10 days, and depending on the areas in which they are working, we show them what our sisters, they spend time with our sisters in their homes, in their workplaces, and understand what are the areas, what were their challenges, and how they have overcome them by organizing. And so I would be happy if you would like to join one of those exposure and dialogue programs. But then as a overall, I think also as this is what I was also talking to Vimal bhai earlier, that we I also agree that in India we do a lot of things but in silos. And of course it's not necessary that everyone knows about everything, but there is we should be having a coalition at country level also, where everyone can share what they are doing and then link up. It kind of a facilitator who links up these like-minded organizations and learn from each other. So that is one thing. And about the skilling point that you just mentioned, we have this when we talk about skilling, there is a stigma, and there is a kind of a I don't know the exact word, but whenever you talk about skilling women, it's only about beauty parlor, garmenting, tailoring, all those things. But that is not true. We at Seva have piloted a green skilling initiative that we call as Surya, where we are training our younger generation daughters as solar PV technicians. We also have set up a climate school where we are training younger generation rural women as climate educators and climate entrepreneurs who facilitate linking of these rural households to climate adaptation and mitigation solutions. Because solar technology is penetrating so much in our country, these solar PV technicians, they are working on, for example, the PM Surya Ghar Yojana. In just last 1.5 months, these young generation daughters who have been trained as climate entrepreneurs and solar PV technicians, they have linked over 100 households in the rural areas, in the interior remote villages, to rooftop solar, enabled them to access subsidy and bank loans. So, we need to systematically address this gender stereotypes in skilling, and that will also lead to generating new livelihood opportunities for women.
Right. Shishir?
Ajayji, delighted actually with the last 15 minutes of the conference, or last 10 minutes. I'll tell you why. The Chintan Research Foundation is actually organizing a day-long event on women empowerment tomorrow. A large part of it, and Deepaji was invited there, a large part of it is actually on gender and the climate change impact on gender. I'm taking the liberty of just reading out 3 conclusions of a report that we are releasing tomorrow. Not like your report today. First, women as frontline climate actors, simply because at the grassroots level, it's women who manage water, energy, food, etc., forest. And if you can empower them with the rights, with the finance, and with the skills, then you are really taking the most important step towards local adaptation and mitigation. Number 2, gender smart solutions. This is based on a lot of survey we did, that gender smart solutions scale faster. If you have solutions for adaptation and mitigation, where, or any climate resilient, whether waste management, agriculture, and if you can align them around women's leadership, you're going to scale them much faster. And the final third point perhaps relates to something which I said. You've got to really take it from vulnerability to agency. Right. Climate change impacts women disproportionately. We were stunned when we even found a correlation between increased domestic violence and aridity in areas. So what we are saying very strongly, that if women are leading self-help groups, which are in the climate change thing, you're going to get much better results. All of you are very welcome tomorrow at the Hyatt at 10 a.m.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll just take your question once the panelists have completed their responses. Vimal, any comments at this moment?
No, I think one thing is quite clear is when it comes to climate action, a lot is happening in India. Being a country of our scale and size, I would be really careful of integrating or synthesizing everything into one. We had to be very cautious the way we are in terms of what things are done. Seva does excellent work, but doesn't mean that it needs to be done the same way in other places. You might have a better example, or maybe a different model works in a different place. So I would rather be very happy if if you think in Himachal or in Kumaon you can do something different. Why not? It's maybe that is more relevant in that context. When you talk about extreme climate events, it's not that everywhere there is earthquake or there is flood. It's completely a different kind of incidents which happen in different places. But one thing which is very important in all this is climate education. So what we are perhaps missing in our textbooks is an awareness which we have to build from the very early formative years of children when they go to school, that they should know what climate change is, they should know what environmental challenges are, and they should know what the climate action solutions are, and that's where you build the right kind of knowledge base. Um, uh, skilling is natural. Whether you skill for anything, climate is just one chapter, I would say, because we should not distinguish climate change from our daily life, because it's nothing but the way we are living, but we need to be aware of that particular aspect in our life. So whatever we do will have a climate impact, and whatever we skill ourselves in, we'll have to do it keeping that in mind. Here, what is important is we should not distinguish climate from development, because what we are talking about here is developing in a manner which is sustainable. So it's a very natural thing. So there's no need for a separate financing for development and separate financing for climate. It's all integrated. It's all part of the same package one works on. But I will also be very cautious about the financing part, about whether we can have one single channel of financing. I mean, I will leave it to the more experts here on the financial aspect. But there is a clear difference in the conversation which happens in COP and what conversation happens in these kind of settings. They're completely, there's no relation at all. What we talk there is completely different from what actually you hear here. Perhaps there is a disconnect between the climate politics and the climate action. And that is perhaps what is need to be linked in a very organic manner. Perhaps you need to change the climate negotiators, bring new set of people who actually understand what they're supposed to do. We have done enough conversation on what the ambition should be. There's enough ambition and we keep talking about ambition, but I think we have crossed that stage of talking only about ambition, but we need to move more on the stage of how do we actually do practically things. When you talk about financing and when we say that things to be bankable and things to be something which will be affordable, that's where the problem is. Yeah. If you bring a technology and if it is not bankable and if it's not affordable, who will do it? Yeah. And so when we say that, okay, let's get some technology and do something, it's not going to work unless until you make it affordable, make it scalable. And that's where I think India is positioned fantastically in the current scenario. I would just end with one point which everybody, at least few of us spoke here, is about leadership. I think we should be very cautious of taking a leadership. We should be actually doing things and leadership will come automatically. Let's not do the other way around, that I want to be a leader so I'm going to do A, B, Z. That's not the way it is. If you think you're doing something nice, please do it. Scale it up. Work with the partners. Develop it. You will become a leader. You don't have to be, you don't have to stand for somewhere to say that I'm a leader and so follow me. You show your leadership by actually doing something good and doing something which is adoptable and something which people will follow.
Thank you. Divya?
Thank you, sir. So, not exactly answering your question, but something related to our work that we do with subnational governments. Okay. I think there is a lot of conversation around lack of capacities. And in Mumbai Climate Week, we actually launched a climate finance facility with the state government of Maharashtra. Could we do it without the state government? No. But when we go and when we speak about some of these things that we are doing, we actually put them at a standpoint that they don't have the capacity. Well, capacity is not the question. The question is, how do we translate those capacities into stronger state level or subnational level fiscal policies that deliver? So actually that is the case. So there's no need to, reinvent the institutional mechanism. It's already there. It's just that we are not very smart enough in making sure that some of these mechanisms deliver. Yeah. So now this is the chance, and also the conversation in Belem is about how do you deliver? Yeah. It's the time to deliver.
Ramesh?
Just a couple of quick thoughts. First on the fragmentation question, I totally agree with what Vimalji mentioned. There are aspects where different institutions and differentiated approaches or solutions, they have a lot of value. That's the way you learn. But when it comes to implementation, particularly if you're looking at operation and maintenance, for example, in the climate space or in the development space, when we are looking at projects, fragmentation is an issue. We recently, CDRI did a global survey of close to about 4,000 enterprises and professionals. Policy fragmentation, coordination fragmentation came up as an issue. And this is a challenge in many countries, not because institutions want to fragment themselves, but there is domain, there is expertise. So how do we come up with frameworks, whether it's for design and execution, and particularly operation and maintenance? How do we address fragmentation challenges? It's a practical issue that we need to work towards, not to be too alarmed, I would say. In the same report, what we've done is to write a series of letters. Basically, these are global letters or memorandums that are written to finance ministers, planning ministers, CEOs of companies, and so on. On skills, totally agree, and I think, again, echoing what Mr. Vimal mentioned, how do we really mainstream climate into education system is important. So we have, for example, academic exchanges that are supported in CDRI. That is actually developing the curriculum so that at all levels, not just at the higher education level, but going down as well. So we could share with you some details. On the grassroots issue, there are aggregators. Actually, CDRI is a global aggregator. We have significant support from India and other donors, and we channel it to implementing partners across the world. CDRI does projects on its own. At the national level, there are similar institutions as well, and we are in the process of setting up a national CDRI Global Trust Fund, and we could be working on in India as well as elsewhere. On the litigation, on the legal framework question, it's obviously very complex. I think the solution would lie in how do we gradually achieve convergence between what you may call as country systems and global systems. So you have accepted international standards, practices for either for ESG or if you're looking at resilience standards and codes. Obviously, you cannot have a one-size-fit-all type of a solution always. But if you are like CBAM, for example, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism that created a huge controversy, but then when implementation started, practical issues came up, but there are solutions that are being found. So likewise, how do we achieve alignment between country and global systems is going to be critical. One example where multilateral institutions have progressed really, particularly in the last 2 years, is recognizing the other institutions' standards so that you need to keep transaction costs and developing low-income countries minimum. So you just recognize somebody else's. You don't impose your own standards, but work collaboratively with them in order to mobilize more capital. So there are examples, and we need more of those.
Thank you very much. Martand and I know the gentleman behind have questions, but we are at 1:34. I'd promised I'd hand it back at 1:30. I would only focus on two things. One is on skilling, and the other is on the huge difference between developed and developing countries, which has not been addressed in the climate negotiation structure. As far as skilling is concerned, I chair a committee which is looking into the educational needs, particularly in the energy area, that's where I will come from, as a result of climate change. Now, one of the things that we understood very early was that, number one, we obviously need a range of skills. So we need women entrepreneurs training. But we also need the IIT engineers to be trained differently. Obviously, the two are very different. Thankfully, the organizations that take care of this are also very different. Now, let me come to the second point because I think it has a bearing on the first as well. What we are seeing is that why is it that developing countries focus on climate and development and the developed countries focus on climate change alone? My view, and I'm not going to make anybody a partner on this, My view is that this occurs because we have a huge amount of latent demand in developing countries. So whether it is energy, or it is transport, or it is housing, or it is just jobs, developing countries need many more of them. So for example, the way I learned of it was when distribution companies came to me and said, listen, you want us to make solar plants? They'll provide us electricity during the day. But 5 years from now, when we have more electricity demand during the day and night, the solar will meet the need during the day. Do I set up new coal plants to meet the need during the night? Thankfully, that question has been answered in the last 2 years when when solar plus wind plus storage became less than the cost of new coal. The question that arises is, why is it not the default scenario? I think we need to work on policies related to land, to lines, and to money to make that happen. But what it tells me also is that the skilling requirements in developed and developing countries would be different. The kinds of skills that are needed and the kinds of new jobs that are created will be very different. I'll leave that here and again thank Deepa ji and NDRC and Rashmi ji and Terry for giving me this opportunity to spout forth before you. Thank you very much.
Very wonderful discussion. My takeaway is that if it were the scientific, technological, and resource capability gaps of developing countries that shaped the structure of Framework Convention on Climate Change and its subsequent treaties under it, it is certainly the experiences of implementing climate action and learnings from them, how to scale up those experiences that would shape the future of climate action and cooperation. So thank you very much. May I now request Samir Quatra, Senior Director, India Program, NRDC, to give his closing remarks. And may I also request the panelists to stay on for a few more minutes. Thank you.
Just 2 minutes. I know we are late, so and I'm not going to rehash everything. First of all, thank you everyone for joining. Before the session, we had this discussion on what happens. In India, there is a lot of interest in coming and talking. We're all thinkers, intellectuals, argumentative Indians. But last October, we had a similar discussion, and so Terry and NRDC teams got together, synthesized those discussions, and you have this report, which you saw was launched, which you can see the QR codes. Please download it, read it. We don't want that discussion to be lost. So this is not just that conversation, additional research, deep research into what this climate policy discussion is happening globally. When we started, both Deepa and Rashmi ji, talked about the moment that we are in. And it's not an easy moment. I think this is the time to think before we act, because there are challenges like they highlighted. So many issues, without going into a very long list of what we discussed here. Multilateralism, Rashmi ji rightly said that it is a threat. Like the moment that we are in is challenging. And although things are happening, Dr. Mathur, like you pointed out, if not multilateralism, then what? Like, what about the small island states, and how do you include them? We talked about lessons that India has to offer. So many things are happening in India. Do they all need to be cohesive, homogeneous, and learn from each other? Probably not. Like Ambassador Kino Vimal mentioned, that we don't have to replicate everything that's happening in one part to all other parts. But at the same time, are there platforms in which they can learn from each other? India is the home of innovation, right? But at the same time, can we have this innovation be more inclusive and be more informative of what is happening not only within the country, but also outside the country? It's like, Mansiben talked about the lessons from India and communities in Africa, the connect that they're trying to make. So even though multilateralism is under threat, G2G, governments are getting transactional, people can come together. This is the world which is more connected than it has ever been in human history. Can communities, can people, can organizations like NRDC, Terry, everyone else who's in this room take this word and talk to others and make these connections? So tons and tons. What I'd like to say is we are committed to each of these issues. Terry, NRDC, multilateralism, climate finance, adaptation and resilience, platforms for not just information in exchange, but also implementation. We are committed to each of these, and we hope you'll continue joining us. So thanks again very much, and have a good day.
Thank you, Samir. I now request my colleague Suruchi Badbal, Program Director, Climate and Air at TERI, to give away a token of our gratitude on behalf of WSDS to our esteemed speakers and panelists today. Can I request the volunteers to please help with the
I'd be so happy. I'd be so happy.
Sure.